At 1:23 in the morning, a button meant to save Reactor 4 helped tear it open. In seconds, a 2,000-ton shield was displaced, and burning fragments of the core fell across the roofs. The blast lit the sky above Pripyat, while radioactive dust crossed the shattered walls, but the city received no warning. Operators were told the reactor could not have exploded. Firefighters were sent toward a danger they could neither see nor smell. Families slept beneath a plume already escaping beyond the plant. The test had been designed to cover a power gap of roughly 90 seconds. Instead, it exposed a gap between catastrophe and truth. Chernobyl would become not only a nuclear disaster, but a thriller of denial measured in human lives. Chernobyl's nuclear station rose in the Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic as a monument to controlled power. Beside it, Pripyat housed workers and families in new apartment blocks, and the state celebrated both as proof of Soviet modernity. Reactor 4 used the Soviet RBMK design, a graphite-moderated reactor capable of producing enormous amounts of electricity. Its operators were expected to obey procedures inside a system that prized production, hierarchy, and secrecy. Yet important dangers were poorly communicated to the people running it, even within official manuals at every level of command. At low power, the reactor could become unstable, and steam forming in its coolant could increase reactivity instead of calming it. Its control rods also carried graphite displacers that could briefly intensify a reaction when inserted from certain positions. These flaws did not make an explosion inevitable, but they made particular operating conditions dangerous. On April 25, 1986, a routine shutdown opened the door to exactly those conditions. Engineers wanted to know whether a coasting turbine could keep coolant pumps powered during the interval before emergency diesel generators took over, a gap that the plant's safety systems needed to reliably survive. The experiment had been attempted before without delivering a satisfactory answer. This time, Reactor 4 was scheduled for maintenance, so the shutdown offered another chance. Power reduction began during the day, but the regional electricity dispatcher asked the plant to delay because the grid still needed its output. Hours passed, and the test moved into the night. When permission finally came, a different shift inherited a procedure whose timing had already been disrupted. During the reduction, reactor power collapsed far below the intended level as xenon absorbed neutrons and choked the chain reaction. Operators tried to recover power by withdrawing many control rods, leaving a dangerously small operating margin. The machine was no longer in the state the test plan had imagined, yet the test continued. By 1:23, the enormous reactor appeared steady on the control room instruments. Beneath those panels, however, coolant conditions and the low control rod margin had made the core unstable far beneath the calm numbers on the panels. At 1:23 and 4 seconds, steam to the turbine was cut, and the coast-down test began. As the turbine slowed, power to several pumps declined, and water flow through the reactor changed. More steam voids formed inside the pressure channels, and in this RBMK state, more steam could mean more nuclear power. 36 seconds into the test, the emergency shutdown button, AZ5, was pressed. The reason remains uncertain. It may have been a routine end to the experiment or a response to alarming conditions. Fully withdrawn rods began descending, but their graphite displacers initially pushed neutron-absorbing water aside and added reactivity in the lower core. Power surged beyond control, fuel channels ruptured, pressure exploded upward, and Reactor 4 destroyed itself. The control room shook, lights failed, and pieces of ceiling fell, yet disbelief survived the explosion. A destroyed core violated everything senior staff believed could happen, so evidence was forced to fit a safer explanation. Men were ordered to restore cooling to a reactor that no longer had an intact core. Some crossed flooded, broken corridors and entered areas where radiation delivered devastating doses. Outside, graphite blocks from the core lay among twisted metal, a fact that should have ended every argument. But available instruments had limited ranges, while alarming readings from other meters were doubted or dismissed. Reports climbed the chain of command slowly, softened by fear of responsibility and the habits of Soviet bureaucracy. Local officials hesitated to order an immediate public evacuation without authority from above. The first containment effort therefore targeted water, fire, and machinery, while the central fact remained officially unspoken. Reactor 4 was open to the night, and the system around it was still trying to make the disaster smaller with words. The first firefighters arrived within minutes, treating the emergency as an industrial roof fire. They climbed toward flames scattered across the turbine hall and neighboring structures, working to prevent the blaze from reaching Reactor 3. They carried ordinary firefighting equipment, not protection designed for an exposed nuclear core, only canvas, helmets, boots, and gloves. Radiation gave them no smoke to recognize, no heat they could reliably feel, and no instinctive signal to retreat. Some noticed strange tastes, nausea, weakness, or reddening skin only after their doses had already become severe. Plant workers joined them in pumping water, opening valves, and searching dark rooms for colleagues. Their courage helped stop conventional fires from spreading, but courage could not shield bone marrow or skin. In the following hours, ambulances carried firefighters and workers to the Pripyat hospital, and the most seriously exposed were later transferred to Moscow. Among roughly 600 people on site, 134 developed acute radiation sickness, and 28 died within 3 months. Dawn found Pripyat still moving through an ordinary Saturday. Children played outside, shoppers entered stores, and residents watched the damaged plant from apartment windows. Officials increased monitoring, but no immediate public warning explained what had entered the air. By late Saturday, radiation levels and the scale of the release made evacuation unavoidable. A government commission finally approved the operation, while nearly 1,200 buses were assembled during the night. Around noon on Sunday, a public announcement told residents to take documents, essential belongings, and food for a short absence. Many believed they would return in 3 days, as officials had implied. Evacuation began at 2 in the afternoon and was largely completed 3 hours later, more than 36 hours after the explosion. Over 40,000 people left Pripyat in that first movement, not knowing the city behind them was becoming permanent memory. The silence had preserved order, but it had also stolen the population's chance to understand its own exposure. The Soviet Union could empty Pripyat, but it could not command the wind. Radioactive material rose from the open reactor and traveled across borders, with the heaviest contamination falling across parts of Ukraine, Belarus, and Russia. On Monday morning, April 28th, radiation alarms sounded on workers entering Sweden's Forsmark nuclear plant. Investigators found contamination on their clothing and then discovered that the source was not Swedish. Weather patterns pointed east, and European governments demanded an explanation. Only then did the Soviet news agency acknowledge that an accident had occurred at Chernobyl. The brief announcement said one reactor was damaged and measures were being taken, while offering little sense of the scale. In Kyiv, public ceremonies for May Day still proceeded as officials avoided clear warnings and rumors filled the vacuum. Fallout was detected across much of Europe, although doses far from the most contaminated regions were generally much lower. The borderless plume had exposed the limits of a state built to control information. Once denial became impossible, the Soviet state mobilized on an immense scale. Helicopter crews flew over the open reactor, dropping materials intended to suppress the fire and reduce releases while receiving heavy exposure. Soldiers, engineers, miners, drivers, doctors, scientists, and plant workers entered a landscape divided into measured zones of danger. They became the liquidators, eventually numbering about 600,000 in official registers. Machines sent onto the most radioactive roofs failed or proved inadequate, so men drawn from across the Soviet republics were used for brutally short runs to throw debris back towards the ruin. Some rooftop shifts lasted only tens of seconds, a second meaning of Chernobyl's 90-second clock. Streets were washed, soil removed, villages evacuated, animals culled, and contaminated equipment buried. By November, a concrete and steel shelter enclosed the wrecked unit, built with extraordinary speed under extraordinary risk. Meanwhile, official investigations emphasized operator violations, even as evidence accumulated about flawed rod design, dangerous reactor physics, and a weak safety culture. The state contained the reactor sooner than it admitted the full design failure that helped destroy it. Chernobyl's lasting consequences resist a single dramatic number. 2 workers died from trauma around the accident, and 28 emergency workers died from acute radiation sickness within months. The clearest long-term radiological effect has been thousands of thyroid cancers among people exposed when young, especially through radioactive iodine in contaminated milk. Broader estimates of eventual cancer deaths remain model-dependent and disputed, while most Europeans received doses far below those in the worst affected regions. In 1986, about 116,000 people were evacuated, and roughly 230,000 more were relocated later. Displacement, fear, secrecy, stigma, and distrust became injuries of their own, deepened by failed regulation and concealment. Later, international reviews shifted blame away from a simple story of reckless operators toward a combination of actions and RBMK design defects. The warning is not that every reactor hides the same flaw, but that complex technology becomes more dangerous when institutions punish bad news. The explosion lasted seconds. The fire burned for days. The argument over truth has lasted generations.